It all started on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Jane, a 45-year-old wife and mother, had always believed in the stability of her marriage. She had been married to Michael for over 20 years, and while the spark between them had dimmed, they had settled into a comfortable routine. They shared their home, their children, and their responsibilities. Jane thought this was enough. But that morning, as she was cleaning out the drawers in Michael's home office, she came across something that shattered the foundation of her world. Among a stack of papers, she found a phone that wasn't hers. It was Michael's phone, left unattended on the desk. Curious and somewhat apprehensive, she picked it up and unlocked it. Her heart sank as she scrolled through a series of text messages that were far too intimate for comfort. The messages were flirtatious, playful, things she hadn't heard from Michael in years. And they were from a woman, someone Jane didn't recognize. Panic surged through her, but she tried to keep calm. Her hands trembled as she read through the texts, each one more incriminating than the last. "Meet me at 7 tonight, I can't wait to see you again. You're so irresistible, I can't stop thinking about you. I wish I could feel your touch right now." Tears filled her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. She didn't want to believe what she was reading, but the evidence was undeniable. Her husband, the man she had trusted for 2 decades, had been seeing someone else. Jane placed the phone back on the desk and sat down, her mind racing. She had suspected something had been off between them lately. Michael had been distant, distracted, but she had never imagined this. She thought of their children, Lucas and Emma, both of them still young and dependent on them. What would this do to their family? Could she face them knowing what Michael had done? She needed to confront him, but the thought terrified her. How would she even begin this conversation? What would she say? Could she even look him in the eyes and ask the question she already knew the answer to? Her heart ached. She had always been the one who held the family together, the one who kept the peace, the one who forgave when things went wrong. But now, for the first time in her life, she didn't know what to do. She wasn't sure she could forgive him this time. As the day passed, Jane was unable to shake the image of those messages from her mind. She tried to go about her usual tasks, taking care of the kids, cleaning, preparing dinner, but everything felt distant, like she was moving through a fog. She couldn't concentrate, couldn't think clearly. How had she not seen this coming? Later that evening, Michael came home from work, his usual smile plastered on his face. He greeted her with a kiss on the cheek, and Jane felt a surge of anger. How could he be so casual, so unaffected? Didn't he feel the weight of his betrayal? She couldn't bear it any longer. As they sat down for dinner, Jane's mind was racing. The children were talking about their day, but Jane couldn't focus on their words. All she could think about was how to confront Michael, how to get the truth out of him. When the meal was over, and the children were upstairs getting ready for bed, Jane knew it was time. She couldn't wait any longer. "Michael," she said, her voice trembling, "we need to talk." He looked at her, his expression curious but slightly concerned. "What's wrong?" "I know about the woman," Jane said, her voice barely above a whisper. She couldn't believe the words were coming out of her mouth. Michael froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. He set it down slowly and looked at her, his face a mixture of surprise and guilt. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but Jane could see it in his eyes. The lie was written all over his face. "You don't have to lie anymore, Michael. I know about the texts. I saw everything." Jane's voice cracked as the tears she had been holding back began to fall. "How could you do this to me? To our family?" Michael sighed, looking down at the table. He seemed to shrink in front of her eyes, and for a brief moment, Jane almost felt sorry for him. But the anger quickly replaced that feeling. He wasn't the victim here, she was. "I'm so sorry, Jane," he said, his voice filled with remorse. "It's been going on for a while now. I never meant for you to find out this way." "Then why did you do it?" Jane asked, her voice barely audible. "How could you betray me like this? We've built a life together, Michael. What happened to us?" He didn't answer right away, and in that silence, Jane realized something. She didn't want his excuses. She didn't want his apologies. She just wanted the truth. The cold, unvarnished truth. "I don't know, Jane," Michael finally said, his voice heavy with regret. "I got caught up in something I shouldn't have. It's all my fault. But I don't know how to fix it." For the first time, Jane looked at him, really looked at him, and saw him for what he was, a man who had betrayed her trust, a man who had chosen someone else over their marriage. She realized that all the years of love, of shared memories and struggles, now felt like they belonged to someone else, someone who wasn't here. "Do you still love me?" Jane asked, her voice trembling. She didn't even know why she asked the question. She already knew the answer. I don't know," Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper. In that moment, Jane knew that everything had changed. There was no going back. No matter what happened next, their marriage would never be the same. She stood up, wiping her tears. "I don't know what to do, Michael. But I can't just pretend everything's fine. Not after this." She turned and walked away, her heart breaking with every step. She had never imagined that discovering the truth would hurt this much. But as she walked up the stairs to her room, one thought kept repeating in her mind. What now? This first chapter sets the stage for Jane's emotional journey, the pain of betrayal, and her initial confrontation with Michael. It serves as the foundation for her internal struggles and the choices she faces in the chapters to come. The days following Jane's confrontation with Michael were filled with a chaotic mixture of emotions. Despite the initial shock, she had forced herself to carry on with the routine of daily life, taking care of the children, making dinner, and keeping up appearances for the outside world. But inside, she was unraveling. The discovery of Michael's affair had shaken her to her core. How could the man she had trusted for so long betray her in such a way? Michael, on the other hand, seemed like a man lost at sea. He was apologetic, constantly expressing remorse, but the sincerity of his words felt empty. Every time Jane looked at him, all she could see were the lies and the broken promises. The man she had known, the loving husband and father, seemed to have vanished, replaced by a stranger who had chosen someone else over her. For the first few days, Michael did everything he could to regain Jane's trust. He would call her multiple times a day to check on her, asking if she needed anything. He sent her flowers, wrote long, heartfelt letters apologizing for his actions. He even suggested going to couples therapy. But no matter how much he apologized, Jane couldn't shake the image of him with another woman, the intimate texts, the betrayal. Every apology felt like a reminder of his infidelity, not a solution to their broken marriage. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, Jane sat in the living room, staring out the window at the quiet street. Her mind was a mess of conflicting emotions. Her heart ached for her children. She didn't want them to grow up in a broken home. But at the same time, she couldn't imagine staying with Michael. She couldn't imagine pretending that everything was okay when she felt so betrayed. As she sat there, deep in thought, Michael came into the room. He stood there for a moment, watching her in silence. Jane didn't turn to look at him. She didn't want to see the remorse in his eyes. "Jane," Michael said softly, his voice strained. "Can we talk?" Jane didn't respond at first, not because she didn't want to talk, but because she didn't know what to say. What was there to say? Everything felt broken beyond repair. Finally, she sighed and looked up at him. "What is there left to talk about, Michael? You've already made your choice. You've already shown me who you really are." Michael's face fell. He stepped closer, his voice desperate. "I never meant to hurt you, Jane. I made a huge mistake. I was selfish, and I regret everything. Please, just give me a chance to fix this. I love you. I want us to work through this together." But Jane could only stare at him in disbelief. Love? Was this what love looked like? Was love so fragile that it could be shattered so easily? "I don't know if I can believe you anymore," Jane said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've shattered everything I thought I knew about us. You've broken my trust in a way that I don't think I can fix. And no matter how many apologies you give me, no matter how many flowers or letters you send, the truth remains. You cheated on me. You betrayed me." Michael took another step forward, his eyes pleading. "I understand, Jane. I know I've hurt you, but I need you to know that it was a mistake. Please, don't let this define us. We've been through so much together. Our kids, our life. We can rebuild it. Please, don't give up on us." Jane stood up, shaking her head. "I don't know if I can, Michael. I don't know if I can keep living in a marriage where trust has been broken like this. I don't know if I can keep pretending that everything is fine when I feel like my world is falling apart." She turned away from him, not wanting to show the tears that were threatening to fall. She had been strong for so long, but now, she felt like she was crumbling under the weight of everything. "Please, Jane," Michael said, his voice breaking. "I love you. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I'll go to therapy, I'll do anything you need. Just don't give up on me." Jane paused, her back still turned to him. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breath. What was she supposed to do? What was the right choice here? She thought of their children, of how much they loved their father. She couldn't imagine telling them that their parents were divorcing. She couldn't imagine the pain that would cause them. But could she continue living a lie? Could she continue pretending that nothing had happened? The silence stretched on for a few more moments before Jane spoke again, her voice trembling. "I don't know, Michael. I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I can keep pretending that we're okay when everything feels so broken." Michael didn't say anything in response. He just stood there, looking at her, as though waiting for some miracle to make everything right again. But Jane knew that there was no miracle. There was no easy fix. There was only pain, confusion, and the harsh reality of a shattered trust. And as Jane stood there, facing the man who had once been her partner, her best friend, her love, she realized that she had reached a breaking point. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that no matter what decision she made, it would be one of the hardest choices she would ever face. In that moment, Jane had to ask herself, was she willing to forgive him and move forward, or was it time to let go and rebuild her life on her own? This chapter explores the aftermath of Jane's discovery, showing her internal struggle and the painful process of confronting the reality of Michael's betrayal. The emotional conflict between wanting to save the family and acknowledging the broken trust creates a tense atmosphere, setting the stage for the choices Jane will ultimately have to make. The days following Jane's confrontation with Michael passed in a blur of exhaustion and overwhelming emotion. She had managed to keep up the appearance of normalcy, preparing meals, helping the kids with homework, and putting on a brave face for the world, but inside, she was falling apart. Every corner of her home seemed to echo with the weight of her broken trust. Every small gesture from Michael, every word of apology, only served to remind her of the wound he had inflicted. Jane had never imagined that her marriage would come to this point. She had always believed in the strength of their bond, in the promises they had made to each other. For years, they had been partners, navigating the ups and downs of life together. Their love, though no longer filled with the passion of their early years, had felt like a comfortable certainty, a foundation upon which they had built a life, a family. But now, that foundation felt like it was crumbling beneath her feet. Despite Michael's pleas and his consistent apologies, Jane couldn't shake the image of him with someone else. The thought of his betrayal haunted her, waking her in the middle of the night, making it impossible to focus on anything else. She could no longer look at him without feeling a sickening sense of doubt, a feeling that gnawed at her heart. She found herself questioning everything, every moment of their marriage, every promise they had made. Was it all a lie? Had Michael been unhappy all along? Had she missed the signs? She knew that trust, once broken, was almost impossible to rebuild. But could she ever truly forgive him? Could she live with the constant reminder of his infidelity? One night, after the kids had gone to bed, Jane found herself sitting alone on the couch, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea. Michael had gone to bed early, a rare attempt to give her space, though she couldn't tell if it was out of respect or fear. Her mind was racing, torn between the life she had known and the unknown path that lay ahead. She thought about the years they had spent together, their shared dreams, their struggles, the family they had built. But now, all of that felt tainted. The man she had married, the man she had trusted, was no longer the person she thought he was. The silence of the house pressed in on her, and she felt the weight of her decisions slowly crushing her. Should she stay and try to rebuild what they had, or should she walk away and face the unknown? Either way, the pain was undeniable. It was then that the phone buzzed on the coffee table. Jane looked down and saw the name of her close friend, Sarah, appear on the screen. Sarah had been one of Jane's closest friends for years, someone who had always been there to offer advice, support, and a listening ear. Jane hadn't told Sarah about what had happened. She wasn't ready to share the details with anyone, but Sarah's text reminded her that she wasn't alone. "Hey, I'm thinking of you. We should meet up tomorrow. I've got a feeling you need to talk." Jane didn't hesitate. She needed someone to talk to, someone who could offer a perspective outside the confines of her own pain. She typed a quick response, agreeing to meet up with Sarah the next day. She knew that the conversation wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that she needed to hear what her friend had to say. The next morning, Jane met Sarah at a small cafe in town. As they sat down at a corner table, Sarah's eyes immediately softened with concern. Jane had always admired Sarah's ability to read her emotions, to understand what she was going through without even having to say a word. "Hey," Sarah said gently, "you don't have to say anything if you're not ready, but I'm here for you. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." Jane took a deep breath and tried to steady herself. The floodgates had already opened, and the tears began to fall. She wiped them away quickly, embarrassed, but Sarah reached across the table and gently placed her hand on Jane's. "I found out about Michael," Jane said, her voice breaking. "He's been having an affair. I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm drowning in this pain, and I don't know how to make sense of it. I love him, but I can't look at him the same way anymore." Sarah listened carefully, her expression full of empathy and understanding. When Jane had finished, Sarah didn't rush to offer solutions. Instead, she allowed Jane to process her emotions in her own time. Finally, after a long silence, Sarah spoke. "Jane, I can't tell you what to do. No one can. But I know that you have to make the decision that's best for you. Staying in a relationship where trust has been broken is one of the hardest things anyone can do. It's not just about forgiving him, it's about forgiving yourself. You have to ask yourself if you can live with the pain and if the relationship is worth saving." Jane nodded slowly, her mind still swirling. She had heard these words before from others, but hearing them from Sarah, someone who knew her so well, made them feel more real. She had to make the decision for herself, not based on guilt, or fear, or the opinions of others. But how could she make that choice when her heart was torn between her love for Michael and her own sense of self-respect? "I don't know if I can forgive him, Sarah," Jane said softly. "But I don't know if I can leave either. The thought of breaking up our family, it feels impossible. How can I just walk away from everything we've built?" Sarah sighed, her voice calm and steady. "I get it. You're thinking about your kids, about the life you've shared. But you also have to think about your happiness. You deserve to feel valued, loved, and respected. And if you stay, it has to be because you truly want to, not because you feel obligated. You can't lose yourself in this, Jane." The words hit Jane hard. She had always put everyone else's needs first, her children, her husband, her family. But in doing so, she had lost herself along the way. She had forgotten what it meant to truly love herself, to put her own happiness and well-being above the weight of everyone else's expectations. The conversation with Sarah was the wake-up call Jane needed. She realized that her pain was not just about Michael's betrayal, it was about the fact that she had allowed herself to be so consumed by her roles as wife and mother that she had forgotten who she was as a person. That night, as Jane lay in bed, she made a decision. She wasn't ready to make a final choice about her marriage, but she knew that she needed to put herself first. She needed time and space to heal, to rediscover who she was outside of the woman who had been hurt. She couldn't keep living for everyone else's happiness. She needed to find her own path forward. But for the first time since discovering Michael's affair, Jane felt a glimmer of hope. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she knew that her journey had only just begun. And whatever choice she made, she would make it for herself. This chapter continues Jane's internal struggle and explores her growing realization that she needs to put herself first. It also introduces the support of her friend Sarah, who offers wisdom and guidance as Jane begins to confront the painful reality of her marriage. The chapter sets the stage for Jane's journey toward healing and self-discovery. After her conversation with Sarah, Jane felt like a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe again. But the clarity she found in those moments with her friend quickly faded as soon as she walked back into her home. Michael had been waiting for her, sitting in the living room, his eyes filled with hope and desperation. Jane couldn't bring herself to look at him the way she once had. He was still the same man she had married, kind, gentle, dependable, but now, all she could see was the betrayal. The words he had said, the lies he had told, haunted her every waking moment. It was like a veil of doubt had settled over everything they had shared. "Jane," Michael said, his voice low and almost pleading, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but please, can we try to work through this?" Jane looked at him, her heart aching. She loved him. She always had. And yet, that love felt like it had been ripped from her, leaving a raw, open wound. How could she trust him again? How could she even begin to rebuild something that had been shattered so completely? "I don't know, Michael," she replied, her voice wavering. "I don't know if I can just forget what happened. How can I look at you the same way when everything feels like a lie?" Michael's face fell, and Jane saw the weight of her words hit him. He stood up and walked over to her, his hand reaching out as if to comfort her. But Jane instinctively took a step back. She couldn't bear the thought of him touching her, not when everything felt so fragile. "I'm sorry," Michael whispered, his voice cracking. "I've messed up in ways I can't even begin to fix. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove to you that I still love you. I'll go to therapy, I'll do anything you need. Please, just don't give up on us." Jane looked at him, her mind spinning. She didn't know what to believe anymore. His words seemed sincere, but so did the apologies from before, the promises that never seemed to last. Could she really rebuild her life with him after what he had done? Could she look past the hurt and try to make it work for the sake of their family? She thought of their children, Lucas and Emma. They adored their father. They had no idea what was happening between their parents. How would this affect them? Jane didn't want to break their hearts, didn't want to tear apart the life they had all worked so hard to build. But at what cost? "Michael," Jane said, her voice quiet, "I don't know if I can forgive you. Not right now. And I don't know if I ever will." His face crumpled as though her words physically struck him. He looked down at his feet, trying to hold back tears, but Jane could see the devastation in his eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you, Jane," he whispered. "I don't want to lose you. I can't imagine my life without you." Jane felt a pang in her chest. She had once imagined growing old with Michael, raising their children, and eventually retiring to a quiet life together. But now, that dream felt like a distant memory. She didn't know what was real anymore. Was it the love they had shared for years, or the painful reality of his betrayal? "I know you didn't want to hurt me," she replied softly. "But the damage is done. And I don't know if I can just pretend that everything's okay." Silence fell between them. It wasn't the kind of silence that came with comfort, but a heavy, suffocating silence that filled the room with unspoken words. Jane could feel the weight of her decision bearing down on her, pressing on her chest like a 1,000-pound weight. Her heart was torn in two, each side pulling her in a different direction. She wanted to save her marriage. She wanted to believe that they could work through this, that Michael's regret was genuine and that he could change. But there was a part of her that couldn't ignore the gut-wrenching pain of his betrayal. How could she continue to live with the person who had broken her trust so completely? Days passed, and Jane tried to go through the motions of life, but nothing felt the same. The tension in the house was palpable, like walking on eggshells. She couldn't bring herself to have a real conversation with Michael. Every word felt forced, like a band-aid covering up the deeper wound that hadn't yet healed. The more she thought about the situation, the more conflicted she became. Every time she considered divorce, she felt a sense of dread. The thought of being alone, of starting over at her age, terrified her. But staying in a marriage filled with this much pain and mistrust seemed equally unbearable. How could she live like this? Was this the life she wanted for herself and her children? That night, after another awkward dinner, Jane found herself alone in the bathroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She looked tired, older than her years, as though the weight of the past few weeks had aged her beyond measure. Her mind raced with thoughts of Michael, of the betrayal, of their future. She didn't know what the right choice was. She didn't know if there was a right choice. All she knew was that the woman staring back at her wasn't the woman she had been before. She had been forced to confront the truth, and it was as if a part of her had been broken open. The woman in the mirror was stronger now, but also more uncertain, more fragile. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered to herself. "I can't keep pretending everything's okay when it's not." But as the words left her lips, Jane felt a sense of finality. The decision she had been avoiding for so long was beginning to surface. She couldn't continue to live in limbo, unable to move forward, unsure of which path to take. The next morning, as Michael left for work, Jane sat down in the quiet of their living room. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain: she couldn't go on like this. It was time to make a decision. And that decision, no matter how painful, would determine the course of her future. After the conversation with Michael that evening, Jane felt more lost than ever. The distance between them had grown into an abyss, and she couldn't help but wonder if there was any way back. She had tried to convince herself that maybe, just maybe, things could return to the way they were. But with each passing day, the crack in their marriage seemed to deepen, and the weight of the betrayal felt heavier. She hadn't told anyone about what had happened, about Michael's affair. Not even her closest friends knew. Jane didn't want to burden anyone with her pain, and if she was being honest, she was ashamed. She wasn't sure if she was more ashamed of Michael's actions or of her own confusion, her inability to make a decision about what to do next. The thought of telling her friends, especially her lifelong best friend Sarah, made her feel vulnerable, exposed. But deep down, Jane knew that she couldn't do this alone. She needed someone to help her sort through the mess in her head, to offer a perspective from outside the chaos of her marriage. It was early afternoon when Jane finally sent Sarah a message. Sarah had always been the type of friend who could read her from a distance, who could sense when something was wrong without even needing to ask. Their bond was unspoken but deep, built on years of shared experiences and unwavering trust. If anyone could help her make sense of the storm inside her, it was Sarah. "Hey, I need to talk. Can we meet today?" Jane typed, her fingers trembling slightly as she pressed send. Almost immediately, her phone buzzed with a reply. "Of course, come over whenever you're ready. I'm here for you, Jane." Relieved, Jane quickly gathered her things and made her way to Sarah's house, hoping that the comfort of her best friend's presence would give her the clarity she desperately needed. When she arrived, Sarah greeted her with a warm embrace, her smile filled with both concern and understanding. "Come in, sit down. I've got coffee brewing, and you can tell me everything. We've got all the time you need." Jane sank into the couch, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She had been running on autopilot for so long, taking care of the kids, managing the house, holding everything together, that it felt almost impossible to let go, even for a moment. But with Sarah's comforting presence beside her, Jane finally allowed herself to break. For the next hour, Jane poured out her heart. She told Sarah everything: the discovery of the affair, the late-night confrontations with Michael, the confusion, the anger, the guilt. As she spoke, she felt the tears fall freely, the weight of her emotions finally being released after weeks of holding them in. Sarah listened without interruption, her eyes soft and filled with empathy. She didn't judge Jane or offer advice right away. She simply allowed Jane to speak, to process, to feel. When Jane finally finished, she sat back, wiping her eyes. The room felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted from her chest. Sarah sat quietly for a moment before responding. "I'm so sorry you're going through this, Jane," Sarah said softly. "I know it feels like you're drowning right now, like there's no way out. But I want you to know something: you don't have to carry this burden alone. I'm here for you. Always." Jane nodded, grateful for Sarah's unconditional support. "I just don't know what to do, Sarah. Michael keeps apologizing, he keeps promising he'll change, but I don't know if I can ever trust him again. I don't even know if I want to. But I feel so guilty, thinking about the kids, thinking about what this will do to our family." Sarah leaned forward, her voice steady and reassuring. "I get it. You're thinking about everyone else, but you also need to think about yourself. What do you need, Jane? What would make you feel whole again, whether it's staying with Michael or moving on?" "I don't know," Jane replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can forgive him. But at the same time, I don't know if I'm strong enough to leave. The thought of breaking up our family, of telling the kids, it terrifies me." "I won't tell you what to do, Jane," Sarah said, her eyes kind but firm. "But I will tell you this: you don't have to decide everything right now. You don't have to rush. You need to give yourself space to breathe, to figure out what's best for you. And when the time comes, you'll make the decision that's right for you, not because of guilt or fear, but because it's what you need to heal and move forward." Jane took a deep breath, letting Sarah's words sink in. It was the first time in weeks that she had felt a sense of relief, like there was still hope for her, no matter the outcome. For the first time in a long while, she realized that her happiness mattered too, that she didn't have to sacrifice herself to hold everything together. "Thank you, Sarah," Jane said, her voice filled with gratitude. "I don't know what I'd do without you. You've helped me more than you know." Sarah smiled warmly and squeezed Jane's hand. "You're not alone, Jane. Whatever you decide, I'll be here to support you. You've always been strong, and you'll get through this, one step at a time." The conversation continued for hours, Sarah offering her advice and perspective, but never pushing Jane in one direction or another. She simply provided the comfort and clarity that Jane needed, reminding her that she wasn't alone in this difficult journey. And as Jane left Sarah's house later that afternoon, she felt a renewed sense of strength. The road ahead was still uncertain, and the decision she had to make was still terrifying, but for the first time in weeks, Jane felt like she was taking the first step toward healing. No matter what happened, she knew she had a support system, a friend who truly understood her pain and who would walk with her through whatever came next. The days following her heart-to-heart with Sarah passed in a haze. Jane felt a sense of relief. Finally, someone had truly listened to her, offered support without judgment. But, as always, life had a way of clouding clarity with its demands. The children still needed their mother, and Michael, despite his ongoing apologies and promises, was still waiting for Jane's decision. The quiet tension in the house felt like a constant, oppressive weight, and the air was thick with unspoken questions. Jane spent the next few days in a daze of self-reflection. Her morning yoga sessions and evening walks had become her solace, her attempts at clearing the mental fog. But no matter how much she tried to center herself, the question of what to do about Michael lingered, hovering in her mind like an insistent whisper. One morning, after another fitful night of sleep, Jane found herself standing at the kitchen counter, staring out the window at the quiet suburban street. She noticed a couple walking by, holding hands, laughing as they spoke. The image pierced her heart. What had happened to her and Michael? Where had their love gone? Had it ever truly been enough? She thought about what Sarah had said, "You need to think about what's best for you." But how could she? How could she possibly make that choice when her children's well-being and her own emotional stability hung in the balance? If she stayed, would she be forever haunted by the betrayal? Would she be able to forgive him, to love him again? Or was the life she'd spent years building with him already shattered beyond repair? That evening, as she prepared dinner, Jane could feel Michael's eyes on her. He had been hovering around her more than usual, desperate for her to look at him, to acknowledge the pain he knew she was in. But Jane couldn't look at him without feeling a deep sense of unease, a creeping doubt that clung to every glance. She thought back to their early years, how they had laughed together, dreamed together. She thought of their first date, how he had made her feel like the most important woman in the world. She could still remember the way he looked at her on their wedding day, full of hope and love. But now, everything felt like a hollow echo of what it once was. As dinner was served, the awkward silence between them seemed to grow louder. Michael tried to fill the space with small talk, but Jane couldn't bring herself to respond. Every word from him felt like a reminder of what had been lost. She couldn't help but ask herself, is this worth saving? The next day, Jane made the decision to leave for a while. She didn't know how long she would be gone, but she knew she needed space to think, space to clear her mind and hopefully, find the clarity she had been desperately seeking. She called Sarah and told her of her plans, and her friend offered nothing but encouragement. "I'll take the kids this weekend if you need more time," Sarah had said. "You deserve to have the time to figure this out, Jane. Don't feel guilty." The guilt, however, was the first thing that crept in as Jane packed a small suitcase. She felt like she was abandoning her family, like she was giving up on everything she had fought so hard to build. But in the deepest part of her soul, she knew she couldn't make a decision about her marriage without first understanding herself, without first remembering who she was outside of being a wife and a mother. She spent the next few days at a small cottage by the lake, a peaceful retreat she had rented for some time alone. The cottage was simple, small, cozy, with a view of the shimmering water. It was exactly what she needed. As soon as she arrived, she felt a rush of relief. The air was different here, fresher, less heavy. There were no reminders of Michael's betrayal, no distractions. Just her, the sound of birdsong, and the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore. The first day was the hardest. Jane spent hours pacing the small cabin, her thoughts a jumbled mess of emotions. She cried sometimes, her sobs echoing in the silence, but there were moments of calm as well. She took long walks along the shore, letting the stillness of the lake seep into her bones. And slowly, the pressure began to ease. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to think about what she needed, what she wanted. By the second day, Jane felt a sense of clarity beginning to form. She didn't have all the answers, but she realized something crucial. Her happiness didn't have to depend on Michael's actions, on the decisions he had made. She didn't have to stay in a relationship that made her feel small, broken, or unsure. She didn't need his apology to feel whole again. She sat on the porch that afternoon, watching the sun set over the water, and finally felt the truth settle in her heart. She had spent years living for others, taking care of Michael, the children, the house, the day-to-day. And in doing so, she had lost sight of her own identity. She had lost sight of the woman who was once so full of dreams, of passions, of a life she wanted to live for herself. She had forgotten what it was like to live for herself, not as a wife, not as a mother, but as Jane. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to dream. She thought about what her life could look like, if she were free of the pain, free from the past. She could travel, write, pick up hobbies she had long abandoned. She could find a career that would fulfill her, pursue the passions she had put aside for so long. But most importantly, she could find herself again. She could reclaim the woman who had once been confident and full of possibility. She could be strong again. But to do that, Jane knew she had to make the hardest decision of all. She had to choose freedom. The next day, she called Michael. Her hands shook as she dialed his number, but she knew what she needed to say. "Michael," she began when he answered, "I've been thinking. I've been giving this a lot of thought, and I think it's time I make a decision. I can't stay in this relationship when I don't know who I am anymore. I need to focus on myself, on healing, on rebuilding who I was before this all happened. I think I need to take a break from us." She paused, her breath catching in her throat. The silence on the other end of the line felt deafening. "Jane," Michael's voice cracked, but Jane cut him off. "I need this, Michael. For me. I need to be alone, to figure out if this marriage is worth saving. I need to heal. And I can't do that with you here." The words felt final. She felt the weight of them as they settled between them, marking a turning point. She was taking her first step toward freedom, and although the road ahead was uncertain, she knew one thing: it was her path to walk, and she would walk it with strength. The weeks spent in the small cottage by the lake had given Jane the space she desperately needed. The stillness of the water, the solitude, and the time spent reflecting had all allowed her to finally breathe, really breathe, without the constant weight of her responsibilities pressing down on her chest. She had come to terms with her emotions, rediscovered parts of herself that had long been buried, and found a sense of clarity that she hadn't known was possible. But as the days passed, reality began to set back in. The calmness she had felt in the cottage was slowly replaced by a nagging sense of unease. Jane had made the decision to take a break, to step away from Michael, but that didn't mean the pain had disappeared. It wasn't just about Michael anymore, it was about her whole life. The questions about what her future would look like, whether her marriage could be saved, and what it would mean for her family were all hanging in the air like storm clouds. Michael had been giving her space, but Jane knew that the inevitable conversation was approaching. She had avoided it as much as she could, not wanting to confront the reality of what it would mean to either stay or leave. But the truth was, she was stuck. She was stuck between a painful past that she wasn't sure she could get past and an uncertain future that felt both terrifying and promising. One evening, after she had returned home to face her family, Jane sat down at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the cold mug of coffee in front of her. The kids were upstairs, playing video games, their laughter a distant echo. Michael was in the living room, watching TV. The house was quiet, too quiet. She could feel the tension in the walls, the silence between her and Michael, and it made her heart race. She had told herself that she would have the conversation soon, that she would finally make a decision. But part of her feared that once she did, the damage would be irreparable. Her fear of the unknown was paralyzing. Divorce? The idea of ending her marriage, of taking that first step into a life without Michael, was more terrifying than she had imagined. She had lived with him for over 20 years. He was her partner, the father of her children. How could she walk away from that? On the other hand, staying meant living in a state of constant pain. Could she really continue to live with someone who had broken her trust in the worst way possible? Could she keep pretending that things would get better when everything felt so broken? The sound of footsteps on the stairs broke Jane from her thoughts. Michael walked into the kitchen, his face tired but earnest. "Jane, we need to talk," he said softly, taking a seat across from her. He didn't wait for her to answer before continuing. "I know things have been hard, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend that everything's okay. I know you've been distant, and I don't blame you. I've hurt you in ways I can't undo. But I'm not giving up. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this." Jane looked at him, her heart heavy. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the desperation for her to believe in him again. But there was something different in her now, something she couldn't ignore. The woman who had once believed that love could overcome anything was no longer sure. She was changed, and the change was irreversible. "I don't know if I can keep doing this, Michael," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know if I can keep pretending that I'm okay. I don't know if I can ever trust you again." Michael's face fell, his hand reaching across the table to grasp hers, but Jane pulled away. The simple touch, once comforting, now felt foreign. She couldn't bring herself to allow him to close the distance between them. "I understand," he said, his voice shaking. "But I need you to know that I'm here, Jane. I'm here for the long haul. I'm ready to fight for us." Jane felt tears threaten to spill from her eyes, but she held them back. She didn't want to cry anymore. She didn't want to feel like a victim of her circumstances. She had already given too much, and now she had to take something back. But her heart was still conflicted, torn between the man who had once been her everything and the reality of the person he had become. "Michael, I don't know if I can do this anymore," she said quietly, her voice breaking. "I don't know if I can keep pretending everything's fine when I feel like I'm drowning. I feel like I'm losing myself, like I've lost who I am in this marriage. I've spent so many years taking care of everyone but me. And now, I don't know how to get back to myself." Michael looked at her, his eyes filled with regret and sorrow. "I'm sorry, Jane. I never wanted you to feel like that. You were always everything to me. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." But Jane could hear the desperation in his voice, and it only made her feel more uncertain. She had heard it all before, his promises, his apologies, but the pain still lingered, raw and fresh. "Michael, I don't know if I can stay," Jane said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I can live with this, with what you've done." The silence between them grew thick and suffocating, and for a moment, Jane wished she could just run away, escape to somewhere where the pain wouldn't follow. But she knew that wasn't the answer. She needed to face this. She needed to make a decision, even if it meant facing the hardest thing she'd ever done. Michael sat back in his chair, defeated. "I don't want to lose you, Jane. I don't know what I would do without you." Jane felt a sharp pain in her chest at the words. She didn't want to lose him either. She didn't want to walk away from the life they had built together. But was it enough to outweigh the betrayal? Was it enough to make her stay? "Maybe we need time apart," Jane said finally, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "Maybe we both need space to figure out who we are, apart from each other. I don't know if I can forgive you, but I need to find out if I can live with this. If I can live with us." Michael nodded slowly, his face a mixture of understanding and sorrow. "I understand, Jane. I'll give you the space you need. I hope we can find a way back to each other." As Jane stood up and walked toward the door, she felt the weight of the decision press down on her once more. The road ahead was uncertain, and the pain of the past was still too raw. But she knew one thing for sure: whatever came next, she had to find herself first. She had to reclaim her own strength, her own voice, before she could decide whether her marriage was worth saving. The decision had been gnawing at Jane for weeks now, an aching, relentless pull that kept her awake at night, tangled in the sheets of doubt. The space she had taken for herself, the quiet moments by the lake, the time with Sarah, had given her clarity, but it also made her confront an uncomfortable truth. No matter how much time she spent trying to find herself again, she couldn't ignore the fact that her life, her family, was broken. She couldn't put the pieces back together and pretend it was whole. The weeks had been slow, the days dragging by, filled with fleeting moments of peace and long stretches of uncertainty. Michael had been patient, giving her space, respecting her need to think things through. But the distance between them, once filled with shared memories and mutual respect, had grown into an expanse too wide to bridge without something fundamental changing. Jane couldn't deny that something had shifted, not just in Michael, but in her. The woman she had been was no longer the woman she was becoming. She wasn't just the mother, the wife. She was Jane again. And Jane didn't know what that looked like anymore. The children still needed her, of course they did, but that wasn't enough to hold her in place. She loved them fiercely, but Jane had spent years loving everyone else at the expense of her own identity. For the first time in a long while, she was thinking about her own happiness, her own future, and not just about how it might affect everyone else. It was a Saturday evening when Jane finally decided to face Michael. The house was quiet, the kids were playing outside, and the weight of the world pressed down on her shoulders. She had been putting it off for far too long, hiding from the inevitable. But this time, there would be no more running. It was time to face the truth. Michael was sitting in the living room, flicking through channels on the TV, when she entered. He looked up at her, his face a mask of exhaustion and hope. He had been waiting for this moment for weeks, just as she had been. The air between them felt thick, charged with 1,000 unspoken words. "Michael," she said, her voice steady but filled with an ache that she couldn't hide. "We need to talk." He put the remote down slowly, his gaze softening. "I know." He had been patient, but Jane could see it in his eyes now, the same desperation she had seen before. She knew this moment would come, but that didn't make it easier. She sat across from him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had rehearsed what she was going to say, but now that the time had come, the words didn't feel as clear as they once had. "Michael, I've spent weeks thinking about everything, about us, about what we've been through, and where we go from here. And I've realized something I don't think I can ignore any longer." Jane took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I can ever trust you again." Michael's face fell, the hope he'd been clinging to quickly fading into sorrow. He opened his mouth to speak, but Jane raised her hand, signaling for him to wait. She wasn't finished. "I don't think I can live in this limbo anymore," she continued, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been living in a cloud of confusion, wondering if I could ever get back what we once had, but I've come to realize that maybe I'm not supposed to go back to that." Michael's eyes filled with tears, and Jane could see the weight of the words sinking into him. He looked so small, so broken in that moment. She had never seen him like this, and it made her heart ache. But the truth was, she couldn't keep pretending that they were okay when everything felt so shattered. "I can't keep staying in this marriage if it means losing myself," Jane said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent so many years caring for everyone else, for the kids, for you. And I lost myself in the process. I'm not saying I'm giving up on us entirely, but I can't keep pretending that things are fine. I need to find myself again before I can decide if I can stay." Michael didn't speak for a long time. He simply looked at her, tears silently streaming down his face. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Finally he nodded, his head dropping in resignation. "I understand," he said, his voice hoarse. "I've hurt you in ways that I can't take back, and I know that. I never wanted to be the man who hurt you, Jane. But if you need to go, I won't stop you." The finality in his voice hit Jane like a wave. She had never imagined that leaving Michael would be this hard. Even now, as she sat across from him, she could feel the weight of the years they had spent together, the memories, the love, the life they had built. But she had also come to realize that sometimes love wasn't enough. Sometimes, love could hurt. Sometimes, love needed to be freed. She stood up, walking over to where Michael sat. He looked up at her, his face full of anguish. Jane reached out and gently touched his shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Michael," she whispered. "I never wanted it to end like this. But I need to live for me now. I need to make the choice that's right for me." Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She couldn't. Not now. She had made her decision, and it was final. This was the hardest thing she had ever done. But it was the only way she could move forward. Jane turned and walked to the door. As she reached for the handle, she glanced back one last time at Michael, sitting in the same place where they had spent so many nights together, laughing, talking, dreaming. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a small sense of peace. "Goodbye, Michael," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. And with that she stepped out the door, leaving behind the life she had known, and the man she had once loved, to find the woman she had always been meant to be.